In the final hours before everything changed, I found myself thinking about silence. Not the silence between words, but the silence between stars, that vast, patient emptiness that swallows light and time and meaning, that witnesses the birth and death of civilizations without judgment or memory. I had lived for over 400 cycles, and in all that time I had never truly understood silence until the moment I sent humanity a message that contained only coordinates, a timestamp, and a single word: help.
My name is Velith Sorn, and I was, the keeper of distant echoes for the Lithiari Communion. It was my sacred duty to maintain the communication networks that bound our 17,000 worlds together, to ensure that no voice was ever truly lost in the dark between stars. For 3 centuries I performed this duty with pride and precision, believing that our web of connection was unbreakable, that the Communion's reach across half a galaxy made us immortal.
I was wrong. The Communion had existed for 11,000 years before humanity discovered fire. We had mapped the gravitational currents between galactic arms, while their ancestors still huddled in caves. We had developed technologies that bent the fabric of reality itself, while they painted images of animals on stone walls. When their first radio signals reached us, crude, scattered, impossibly primitive, we catalogued them as we catalogued the thermal emissions of new stars. Interesting, perhaps, but ultimately insignificant. We were not cruel. We simply understood our place in the cosmic order. The Lithiari Communion was ancient, wise, and powerful. Humanity was a species barely emerged from its own gravity well, still fighting among themselves over resources and ideology, still struggling with the basic mathematics of interstellar travel. They were children, and we were gods.
Gods do not ask children for help.
But gods, I learned, can still die. The absence came from somewhere beyond our maps, from a direction we had never thought to look because nothing had ever come from there before. They were not a species in any sense we understood. They were a phenomenon, a hunger given form, a void that consumed not just matter and energy, but information itself. Where they passed, stars did not simply go dark, they were erased, their light retroactively removed from the universe as if they had never existed. I remember the first reports. A research station in the outer reach went silent. Not destroyed, simply absent. When we searched for its records, we found nothing. When we asked personnel who had served there, they could not remember the station's name, its location, the faces of the colleagues they had lost. The absence did not kill, it unmade.
Within 3 cycles, we had lost 1,000 worlds. I do not speak of this lightly. 1,000 worlds. Billions upon billions of lives, histories stretching back millennia, art and science and philosophy accumulated over generations, all of it gone. Not destroyed in fire or conquest, but simply removed from existence, as if the universe itself had decided they had never been.
The Communion's response was everything you would expect from a civilization of our age and power. We deployed fleets that darkened the skies of worlds. We unleashed weapons that had not been fired since the last unification war, energies sufficient to reshape the surfaces of planets. We threw everything we had at the advancing darkness. It was not enough. It was never enough. I watched the fleet of the Third Arm, 12,000 warships, the pride of Lithiari military achievement, engage the absence at the Verith boundary.
They fought with courage and skill, with tactics refined over millennia of warfare, with weapons that could crack continental plates.
The absence consumed them in 17 minutes. Not destroyed, consumed. When I searched the records afterward, I could find no mention of the Third Armed Fleet. When I asked Admiral Corvon about the battle, she looked at me with confusion in her ancient eyes and asked, "What battle?" That was when I understood. We were not fighting an enemy. We were fighting entropy itself, given will and purpose. And entropy always wins. The Communion's leadership refused to accept this truth. They ordered more fleets deployed, more weapons developed, more resources committed to a war that could not be won. I watched them plan and strategize and debate, and I saw the desperation beneath their certainty, the fear they would not acknowledge. I began to make my own preparations. As keeper of distant echoes, I had access to communication channels that few others knew existed. Emergency frequencies, last resort protocols, ancient systems maintained more out of tradition than necessity. One of these channels connected to a network that humanity had established decades ago. A primitive thing by our standards, barely capable of transmitting structured data across interstellar distances. I had never used it. No Lithiari had. What would we possibly have to say to a species so young, so limited, so far beneath our notice? But as I watched our civilization crumble, as world after world vanished into the absence, I found myself returning to that channel again and again. I studied humanity's transmissions, their news broadcasts, their entertainment, their scientific papers and political debates. I learned their languages, their customs, their history. What I found surprised me. They were violent, yes, divided, certainly, primitive by any measure the Communion would recognize, but there was something else in their transmissions, something I had not expected. They spoke constantly of survival, not in the abstract philosophical way that the Lithiari discussed existence, but in immediate, visceral terms. They told stories of disasters overcome, of extinctions narrowly avoided, of moments when their entire species had stood on the brink of annihilation and somehow pulled back. They had faced their own darkness many times, and they had endured. I did not know if this mattered. I did not know if humanity could offer anything against the absence. But as the last defenses of the inner reach began to fall, as the Communion's leadership retreated to bunkers that we all knew would not save them, I made my decision. I sent the message. Coordinates. Timestamp. One word. Help! I expected nothing. I had no reason to expect anything. Humanity's combined fleet numbered perhaps 300 vessels, most of them barely capable of interstellar travel. Their weapons were crude, their defenses laughable, their understanding of physics centuries behind our own. What could they possibly do against an enemy that had unmade 11,000 years of Lithiari civilization in less than a cycle? The response came in less than an hour. Not a message. A ship. It emerged from fold space at the edge of our system without warning, without announcement, without the elaborate protocols that governed all Lithiari arrivals. One moment the space was empty, the next a vessel was there, angular, utilitarian, bearing none of the aesthetic flourishes that our ships displayed. It looked functional rather than impressive, designed rather than crafted. Lithiari Communion Vessel, a voice said over the communication channel. Female, calm, speaking our language with an accent I did not recognize.
This is the Earth vessel Prometheus. We received your transmission. We are here to help."
I stared at the communication display, uncertain how to respond. A single ship. They had sent a single ship.
"I am Velith Sorn, keeper of distant echoes," I finally managed. "I thank you for responding, but I must be honest with you. The threat we face—"
"We know." The voice remained calm. "We've been monitoring your situation for some time. We have a general understanding of what you're dealing with."
"Then you understand that one ship—"
"May I come aboard? It would be easier to discuss this in person." I hesitated. No human had ever set foot on a communion vessel. The protocols against it were ancient and specific. But the protocols had been written for a communion that still existed, for a civilization that still had the luxury of maintaining barriers between itself and lesser species.
"Yes," I said, "you may come aboard."
The woman who materialized in my communication center was smaller than I expected. Humans had always seemed fragile to me in the recordings I had studied, but in person, that fragility was even more apparent. She was perhaps a third of my height, her skin a warm brown, her dark hair cut short in a practical style. She wore a uniform that was clean but unadorned, and she carried herself with a stillness that seemed at odds with the frantic energy I had always associated with her species.
"Keeper Sorn," she said, inclining her head in a gesture of respect. "I'm Captain Amara Okonkwo. Thank you for receiving me."
"You came quickly," I said. "The message was sent less than—"
"An hour ago, yes." She met my eyes, a directness that was unusual in human communication protocols I had learned. "We've had ships positioned near communion space for several weeks. When we detected the absences advance, we anticipated that contact might become necessary."
"You anticipated this?" "We monitor threats to galactic stability," the absence qualified.
I did not know how to respond to this. The idea that humanity, primitive, insignificant humanity, had been monitoring a threat that had brought the communion to its knees was difficult to process.
"Captain Okonkwo," I said carefully, "I appreciate your response, truly, but I must be direct with you. The absence has destroyed over 9,000 of our worlds. Our fleets, our weapons, our most advanced technologies, none of them have had any effect. I do not know what you believe you can accomplish with a single ship." "May I ask you something first?" The question caught me off guard. Of course.
"Why did you send the message?"
I don't understand." "Your civilization has existed for 11,000 years. You have technologies we can barely comprehend. You have never once in all that time asked for help from any other species. So why now? Why us?" I found myself unable to answer immediately. The question touched something I had not allowed myself to examine too closely. The desperation that had driven me to reach out to a species my people had always dismissed. "Because there was no one else," I admitted. "Because every power in the galaxy that could have helped us has either fallen to the absence or retreated behind barriers they believe will protect them. Because I studied your species and found something that I did not expect." "What did you find?" "Experience with survival. Not the theoretical kind, but the real kind. The kind that comes from facing extinction and choosing to continue anyway." I paused, surprised by my own honesty. "The Lithiari have never faced true extinction. We have always been too powerful, too advanced, too secure in our place in the universe. We do not know how to fight when fighting seems impossible. But you do."
Captain Okonkwo was quiet for a moment. Something shifted in her expression. Not quite a smile, but something like recognition.
"You're right," she said. "We do."
"Then you understand why I called."
I understand why you called, but I don't think you understand why we answered.
"I assumed, because we asked."
Keeper Sorn, in the 3 centuries since humanity achieved interstellar travel, we have been contacted by over 40 species. Most of them were like you, ancient, advanced, powerful. Most of them wanted something from us: resources, labor, territory. Sometimes they were polite about it, sometimes they weren't. She paused. Not one of them ever asked for help.
I felt something cold settle in my chest. "We have not been kind to your species."
"No, you haven't." Her voice held no accusation, only acknowledgement. "The Lithiari Communion formally declared humanity a species of no strategic significance 200 years ago. Your trade policies have consistently disadvantaged our merchants. Your diplomatic corps has refused every overture we've made for closer relations."
And yet you came. And yet we came. She moved to the observation port, looking out at the stars. "Do you know why?"
No, because you asked. She turned back to face me. Not demanded, not bargained, asked. One word, sent on a channel that most of your people probably don't even know exists. Help. Just help.
Is that enough?
It's everything. She was quiet for a moment. Keeper Sorn, humanity has spent its entire existence being underestimated by our own planet, which tried to kill us with ice ages and plagues and disasters, by each other in wars that nearly ended our species, by every advanced civilization that looked at our short history and primitive technology and saw nothing worth respecting.
I meant no disrespect. I'm not looking for an apology. I'm explaining something. She met my eyes again. We've learned to be patient, to build quietly, to prepare for threats that others dismiss as impossible. Because we know, in a way that older, more secure species cannot know, that the universe is not safe, that extinction is always possible, that the only thing standing between existence and oblivion is the willingness to fight.
"And you believe you can fight the absence?"
I believe we're going to try, and I believe that trying is the only thing that matters.
Over the hours that followed, I learned things about humanity that no Lithiari archive had recorded. Captain Okonkwo spoke of her species' history, not the sanitized version that our scholars had studied, but the raw truth of a people who had clawed their way to the stars through blood and fire and near constant catastrophe.
She told me about their world wars, conflicts that had killed hundreds of millions and nearly poisoned their entire planet. She told me about the climate crisis that had nearly made their homeworld uninhabitable, and the desperate century of work that had pulled them back from the brink. She told me about the quiet years, when a plague had reduced their population by 1/3, and they had emerged from the darkness with a new appreciation for the fragility of existence. "We break," she said simply, "often, but we've never broken completely. There's always someone left to pick up the pieces, always someone who refuses to accept that it's over." "And you believe that refusal can stand against the absence?" "I believe that refusal is all any of us ever have." She touched a control on her wrist, and a display appeared in the air between us, a tactical projection of the galactic region. "The absence is advancing along a predictable vector. Based on our analysis, it will reach the Communion's core systems within 2 cycles. After that, it will continue toward the galactic center, consuming everything in its path. We know this. Our projections are similar.
What you don't know is that we've been studying the absence since its emergence, not just observing, studying. We've deployed sensor platforms, collected data, analyzed its behavior patterns. We think we understand something about how it works.
I stared at her. You've been studying it while we were dying?
While you were fighting, there's a difference. Her voice was gentle but firm. Keeper Sorn, your fleets engaged the absence with every weapon you had. That was brave and necessary and entirely futile. You can't fight entropy with energy weapons. You can't destroy a phenomenon that consumes destruction itself.
Then what can you do? You redirect it, contain it, give it something to consume that isn't everything else.
I did not understand what she was saying. You mean sacrifice worlds to it? Let it consume?
No, nothing like that. She manipulated the display and new data appeared. Equations, diagrams, models of exotic physics that even I could barely follow. The absence feeds on information, on the structural coherence that makes matter and energy meaningful. But information isn't just a passive thing to be consumed. It can be weaponized, concentrated, turned into a trap.
A trap?
We call it the Echo Protocol. It's theoretical. We've never had the chance to test it, but the mathematics are sound. She looked at me with those calm, certain eyes. We can't destroy the absence, but we can give it something so dense, so rich in information, that consuming it will take forever, literally forever, an infinite meal that it can never finish.
How is such a thing possible?
By creating a self-referential information structure, a pattern that contains itself, that generates new complexity faster than it can be consumed. The absence will feed on it for eternity, trapped in an endless loop of its own hunger.
I tried to process what she was describing. And you can create such a structure?
We can. We have. It's been waiting for the right moment.
Waiting? How long have you been preparing for this?
Captain Okonkwo was quiet for a long moment. Since we first detected the absence's emergence in intergalactic space, 37 years ago. I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. 37 years. You have known about this threat for 37 years. We knew there was something coming. We didn't know what exactly, so we prepared for everything we could imagine, and quite a bit we couldn't. And you said nothing to anyone.
We tried. Her voice was quiet. 18 years ago, we sent envoys to every major power in the galaxy. The Lithiari Communion, the Cathari Federation, the Synthesis Collective. We shared our data, our projections, our concerns. We asked for cooperation in developing countermeasures.
I searched my memory. I had been keeper of distant echoes for over a century. I would have known about such an outreach.
I have no record of this contact. No, you wouldn't. She smiled, and there was no bitterness in it, only a strange, patient understanding. Our envoys were politely dismissed. The Communion's official response was that humanity's limited understanding of cosmological phenomena did not warrant serious consideration. The data we provided was filed and forgotten. I closed my eyes. We ignored you. You underestimated us. There's a difference. She turned back to the display. We didn't stop preparing. We couldn't afford to. We knew, even if no one else believed us, that something was coming. So we built, quietly, carefully, in places no one was watching.
Built what?
She touched another control, and the display changed. What I saw took several moments to comprehend. It appeared to be a construction schematic, but the scale was impossible.
The structure it depicted was not a ship or a station. It was an architecture of space itself, a framework that spanned light years, built from components I could not identify, using principles I did not recognize.
What is this?
We call it the lighthouse. It's the delivery system for the Echo Protocol, the structure that will create the infinite trap.
This is not possible. The resources required, the technology, the coordination. 37 years of preparation. The combined effort of every human being alive, every shipyard, every research facility, every industrial capacity we possess has been working toward this moment. She paused. This is why you only see one ship, Keeper Sorn. This is why humanity's fleet seems so small. Because everything else has been devoted to building something that could actually make a difference.
I stared at the schematic, trying to grasp the scale of what she was showing me. Your entire species has been working on this?
When we face extinction, we don't divide, we unify. We've learned that lesson too many times to forget it. But the galaxy dismissed you, ignored you, left you to face this alone.
Yes, she met my eyes. And we prepared anyway, because that's what survival looks like. Not waiting for someone else to save you, not hoping that the threat will pass. Just preparing, every day, every year, until you're ready.
And now, you ready?
Now we're ready.
The word spread quickly through what remained of the communion. A human vessel had arrived. The humans had a plan. Hope, a fragile, desperate hope, began to flicker in the darkness.
I watched Captain Okonkwo coordinate with our remaining military leadership, explaining the Echo Protocol in terms they could understand, answering questions with patience and clarity. She never raised her voice. She never showed frustration at the skepticism some of them displayed. She simply explained, demonstrated, and waited for understanding to dawn.
"Your captain is unusual," I said to the human officer who had accompanied her, a young man named Lieutenant Chen, who served as her aide. I don't know what I expected. Bravado, perhaps, claims of superiority.
Lieutenant Chen smiled. Captain Okonkwo lost her entire family in the Pacific collapse. She was 12 years old, spent the next 30 years working to make sure nothing like that would ever happen again. He watched his captain explain something to a skeptical Lithiari admiral. She doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. She just needs to save people.
And she believes she can save us? She believes she can try. That's usually enough.
The hours that followed were a blur of preparation and coordination. The Prometheus served as a communication hub, relaying instructions to human vessels that began emerging from fold space throughout the region. Not warships, construction vessels, engineering platforms, massive industrial craft that had been waiting for this moment. I watched them position themselves at carefully calculated coordinates, deploying components I did not recognize, building something vast and invisible in the space between stars. The lighthouse was taking shape.
"You've been planning this for so long," I said to Captain Okonkwo during a brief pause in the preparations. "Why didn't you just let us fall? Let the absence consume the civilizations that dismissed you, and then deploy your solution when it threatened your own space."
She looked at me for a long moment. "Is that what you would have done?"
I wanted to say no. I wanted to believe that the Lithiari communion would have come to the aid of any species facing extinction, regardless of how they had been treated. But I thought of our history, our policies, our dismissal of younger species, and I could not find the words.
"I don't know," I admitted. "That's honest." She returned her attention to the coordination displays. "We didn't ask why you needed help. We didn't calculate whether you deserved it. We didn't weigh your past treatment of us against the value of your lives. You asked, and we came."
Why?
"Because that's who we are. That's who we've chosen to be." She paused. "Humanity could have destroyed itself 100 times over. We had the weapons, the hatred, the capacity for self-annihilation. But we're still here. Not because we're better than the darkness inside us, but because we keep choosing to be. Every day, every generation.
And you choose to help those who dismissed you.
We choose to help anyone who asks, because we remember what it was like to face the end alone. We remember the moments when no one came to save us, when we had to save ourselves. And we decided that if we ever had the power to answer someone else's call for help, we would, no matter what, no matter who.
I did not know how to respond to this. It was so different from the Lithiari way. Our careful calculations, our assessments of strategic value, our reluctance to expend resources on those who could not reciprocate. Humanity's approach seemed almost naive.
But as I watched their vessels work, as I saw the lighthouse taking shape in the void, I began to understand that it was not naive at all. It was something else entirely.
It was strength. The absence arrived 2 hours ahead of schedule.
I was on the observation deck when it emerged, a spreading darkness at the edge of the system, a void that seemed to consume the stars themselves. The last Lithiari fleet moved to engage, more out of instinct than strategy, but Captain Okonkwo spoke calmly over the communication channels.
"All communion vessels, hold position. Do not engage. Repeat, do not engage." "You expect us to simply wait while it advances?" Admiral Corvin's voice was sharp with fear and anger. "While it consumes everything we have left?"
"I expect you to trust us, just for a little while longer."
I watched the darkness spread, watched it reach toward the worlds I had spent my life protecting. Every instinct screamed at me to do something, to fight, to flee, to act in any way that might feel like resistance.
But I remembered what Captain Okonkwo had said about humanity's approach to extinction. Not the fighting part, the preparation part, the patience, the willingness to wait until the moment was right.
"Trust them," I said over the fleet channel. "Hold position."
The absence continued to advance. I could feel it now, a pressure in my mind, as if something was trying to unmake my memories, my sense of self. The stars at the edge of my vision flickered and disappeared, not going dark, but simply ceasing to exist.
And then the lighthouse activated.
I cannot describe what I saw. There are no words in any language I know for the way space itself seemed to fold, the way light bent toward a point that was not a point, the way reality contracted and expanded simultaneously around a structure that existed in dimensions I could not perceive.
The absence paused. For the first time since its emergence, the darkness stopped advancing. I felt its attention shift, felt it as if the weight of its hunger was a tangible thing, toward the lighthouse.
And then it began to feed.
I watched the absence flow toward the trap humanity had built, watched it consume the infinite structure that had been prepared for it. The darkness contracted, folded in on itself, drawn inexorably toward a meal it could never finish.
Captain Okonkwo's voice was calm over the communication channel. Echo protocol is active. The absence is engaging the trap. All vessels maintain position.
I stood at the observation port, watching the impossible unfold. The darkness that had consumed 11,000 years of Lithiari civilization, that had unmade worlds and erased billions of lives, was now trapped in an endless loop of its own hunger, feeding forever on infinity itself. It took hours for the absence to fully contract into the trap, hours during which I stood and watched, unable to look away, unable to fully believe what was happening. When it was over, when the last tendrils of darkness had been drawn into the lighthouse's infinite recursion, the stars burned clear once more.
The universe was quiet, peaceful, saved.
I found Captain Okonkwo in the Prometheus's small observation lounge, looking out at the stars she had helped to preserve. She looked tired, genuinely tired, in a way I had not seen before.
"It's over?" I asked.
The absence is contained. It will feed on the lighthouse for eternity, trapped in a prison of its own hunger. She paused. We'll need to establish monitoring systems, develop contingency protocols. But yes, it's over.
How many, I asked, how many of your people worked on this?
All of them, she smiled slightly. Every human being alive contributed something. Scientists, engineers, builders, teachers who educated the next generation of problem solvers, parents who raised children with the values they would need, even the artists who kept hope alive when the work seemed impossible.
"All of them?" I repeated, "for 37 years. For the chance to save everything." She turned to face me. "That's what humans do, Keeper Sorn. When the threat is big enough, when the stakes are high enough, we stop being individuals and become something larger, something that can accomplish things no single person ever could."
We could not do that, the Lithiari. We are too old, too set in our ways. We fight as individuals, as factions, as power structures.
You could learn. You have time now. She gestured at the stars. That's what survival buys you. Time. The chance to become something better than you were.
I thought about her words for a long time, about the Communion's arrogance, our dismissal of humanity, our certainty that our power and age made us superior. We had faced extinction and discovered that all our advantages meant nothing against a threat we could not comprehend. And humanity, young, primitive, dismissed humanity, had saved us, not with superior technology or ancient wisdom, but with patience and preparation and an absolute refusal to accept defeat.
"Why didn't you ask why?" I said finally.
She looked at me, questioning.
When I sent the message, when I asked for help, you came immediately. You didn't ask why we needed help, or what we could offer in return, or whether we deserved to be saved. You just came.
Captain Okonkwo was quiet for a moment. Does it matter why someone is drowning? Does it matter what they did before they fell in the water? Does it matter what they might do after you pull them out?
Most species would say yes.
Most species haven't learned what we've learned. She looked out at the stars again. When you've faced extinction as many times as we have, you start to understand something. Life is precious. All life. Not because of what it might do or what it might become, but simply because it exists. Because the universe is vast and cold and dark, and every light that burns in it is a miracle.
So you save everyone who asks?
We try to save everyone we can. Asking just makes it easier to know where to go. She smiled. You reached out, Keeper Sorn. You sent a message into the void, hoping someone would answer. That took courage. That took humility. After 11,000 years of being the most powerful civilization in the galaxy, you admitted that you needed help.
I was desperate.
You were human. She caught my expression and laughed softly. Not literally, but in the way that matters. You faced the end of everything, and instead of accepting it, you fought. You reached out. You refused to go quietly.
And you answered, "We always will. As long as we exist, as long as we have breath in our bodies and strength in our hands. When someone calls for help, we will come." She turned to face me fully. "That's the promise we made to ourselves, Keeper Sorn. The promise we keep every day. Not because we're better than other species, not because we're stronger or smarter or more advanced, but because we remember what it feels like to be alone in the dark, facing the end of everything. And we will not let anyone else face that alone."
In the days that followed, I watched humanity's vessels depart one by one, returning to their own space. The lighthouse remained, a permanent fixture in the void, a reminder of what had been accomplished and what had nearly been lost.
The communion began the long work of rebuilding. We had lost so much. 9,000 worlds, billions of lives, 11,000 years of accumulated knowledge and culture. The scars would take centuries to heal, if they ever fully healed at all.
But we were alive. We existed. We had been given a second chance that we had done nothing to deserve by a species we had dismissed as insignificant.
I sent a message to Captain Okonkwo before she departed, a formal expression of gratitude from the Lithiari Communion, drafted by our finest diplomats and approved by the highest levels of our surviving leadership. It was eloquent and appropriate, and said everything that propriety required.
But I also sent a second message from myself alone. It contained only a few words.
"Thank you for not asking why."
Her response came within the hour.
You asked. That was enough. It will always be enough.
We sent one final call into the void, expecting nothing, hoping for anything.
Earth did not ask why. Earth did not calculate the costs and benefits. Earth did not weigh our past treatment of humanity against the value of our lives.
Earth simply answered.
And that answer saved us all.
There is a frequency that travels between stars now, maintained by both the Lithiari Communion and the human government. An open channel, monitored at all times, available to anyone in need. The humans call it the lighthouse frequency, a reference to their ancient tradition of building towers on coastlines to guide ships safely through dangerous waters.
It carries a simple message, broadcast in every language known to the galaxy. If you need help, call. We will come. We will not ask why. That is humanity's gift to the universe. Not power or technology or ancient wisdom, just a promise, kept every day, in every way they can, for as long as they exist. They do not ask why, because they understand something that older, wiser civilizations have forgotten, that life itself is the only justification that matters, that existence is precious beyond measure, that the only response to someone drowning is to reach out your hand. We called. They came. They saved us. And they are still out there, watching the stars, waiting for the next call, ready to answer, ready to help, ready to remind the universe that darkness is never the end. Not as long as someone, somewhere, refuses to let it be. That is who humanity is. That is what they have chosen to become. And may whatever gods exist help anyone who forces them to prove it again.